Lightning splits the dying sky. Thor stands knee-deep in a poisoned sea, Mjolnir raised, as the world serpent rises, jaws wide enough to swallow horizons. The serpent's venom hisses against the sea, boiling the water white. Thor does not step back. He has waited his whole immortal life for this moment. How does a god arrive at the end of everything? What forged the thunder, and the man who wielded it? Tonight, we walk the road to Ragnarok. The prophecy carved in the roots of the world tree was clear. Thor would slay the serpent, then fall. 9 steps, that was all he'd have left. Every god in Asgard knew the ending. Odin had seen it. The Norns had woven it. Yet Thor sharpened his hammer and waited, not with dread, but readiness. We all face storms we cannot outrun. The Norse understood this. Courage isn't the absence of fate, but the defiance of it. Thor's thunder carries that truth. Get comfortable now. Pull the blankets close. The Norse told these stories through the longest, darkest winters. Voices low by the fire, snow piling against the door. If you fall asleep before Thor reaches his final battle, that's exactly right. The Old Norse believed dreams were visits to other realms. Let yours begin. Our story begins before Thor, before thunder itself. In the beginning, there was only ice in the north and fire in the south, and a vast emptiness between. The void was called Ginnungagap. Where the frost met the flame, something stirred. Drops of melting ice formed a shape. The first giant, Ymir, breathing slow and vast. From Ymir's sleeping body, more giants grew. From his sweat, from his limbs. And from the same melting ice, a great cow named Audhumbla licked the salt and freed another being. That freed being was Buri, grandfather of Odin. 3 generations of gods grew strong while the giants multiplied. 2 families sharing one frozen cradle, and neither willing to share forever. Odin and his brothers killed Ymir. The giant's blood became a flood that drowned nearly all his kin. From his corpse, the young gods built everything. His skull became the sky. His bones became mountains. His blood filled the oceans. The world we walk on was once a giant's dreaming body. The gods carved Ask and Embla from driftwood on a beach. The first man and woman. Odin gave them breath. Another god gave them warmth. Life began at the edge of the sea. Odin built Asgard above the clouds and linked it to the mortal world by a bridge of burning rainbow light, the Bifrost. Gods above, mortals below, giants at the edges. Into this ordered world, a son was born to Odin. Red-haired, loud from his first breath, strong enough to lift his cradle before he could walk, they called him Thor. He was not the wisest god nor the most cunning. But when the frost giants howled at the borders, when monsters stirred in the deep, it was Thor the mortals called. Thor grew fast, faster than any god before him. By the age a mortal child learns to walk, Thor was wrestling wolves in the forests of Asgard and winning. Odin watched his son with one careful eye. The boy had strength beyond measure, but wisdom, that was another matter entirely. Thor solved most problems with his fists. Where Odin craved knowledge, Thor craved justice. Where Odin whispered, Thor roared. Father and son, alike in stubbornness, opposite in everything else. But there was one who matched Thor in spirit, not in strength, but in cleverness. Loki arrived in Asgard like smoke through a keyhole. No one remembered inviting him. Loki could become anything, a salmon, a fly, a mare, an old woman. His shape was as fluid as his loyalty. Odin named him blood brother. Thor called him friend. Together, Thor and Loki were unstoppable. Thunder and trickery, hammer and wit. They traveled the 9 realms seeking adventure, each saving the other more times than either would admit. The frost giants feared Thor above all gods. His name alone could scatter a raiding party. Mjolnir had not yet been forged, but Thor's bare hands were weapon enough. Sif caught Thor's eye the way lightning finds a tree, suddenly and completely. Her golden hair fell like a harvest field in sunlight, and Thor, for once, had no words. Loki, of course, found this hilarious. The god who bellowed at giants couldn't string 2 words together for a goddess. Even the ravens seemed to laugh. Thor and Sif married in Bilskirnir, his great hall of 540 rooms. Thunder rolled gently across Asgard that night, the sky itself celebrating. But Loki's humor had edges. One night, while Sif slept, he crept into her chambers and sheared her golden hair to the roots. He called it a joke. Thor called it war. Thor's fist closed around Loki's throat. The trickster's feet left the floor. For the first time, Loki saw death in his friend's eyes and understood he'd gone too far. "Fix it," Thor growled, "or I'll break every bone you have and let them heal crooked." Loki, for once, did not argue. He fled to the dwarves, the master craftsmen underground. Deep in Svartalfheim, fires burned that could melt starlight. The dwarves Brock and Sindri worked metals no surface creature had ever seen, forging wonders for whoever could pay their price. Loki bargained with his silver tongue. He promised wonders, he flattered, he lied. The dwarves agreed to forge new hair for Sif, spun from actual gold, finer than her original locks. But Loki, being Loki, couldn't resist a gamble. He bet the dwarves his own head that they couldn't forge 3 treasures greater than the sons of Ivaldi had made. The dwarves accepted. Sindri placed a pigskin in the forge and told Brock to pump the bellows without stopping. Loki, panicking, became a fly and stung Brock's arm. The dwarf didn't flinch. From the forge came Gullinbursti, a living boar made of golden bristles that could outrun any horse and light the darkest realm. The first treasure, Loki felt his neck grow cold. Next, Sindri placed gold in the forge. Again Loki stung, this time Brock's neck. The dwarf grunted but kept pumping. Out came Draupnir, a golden ring that dripped 8 copies of itself every 9th night. For the third forging, Sindri placed iron in the coals. This time Loki stung Brock's eyelid. Blood poured into the dwarf's eye. His hand faltered, just once, on the bellows. That single falter. That one heartbeat of broken rhythm. When Sindri pulled the weapon from the fire, it was perfect in every way, except the handle was too short. Mjolnir. The dwarves named it Mjolnir, that which smashes. Despite its flaw, it could level mountains. It would always return when thrown, and it could never miss its mark. The gods judged the contest. Mjolnir, they declared, was the finest thing ever made, because it could protect both Asgard and Midgard from the giants. Loki lost the bet. Brock came for Loki's head. But the trickster argued, "You can have my head, but not 1 inch of my neck." The bet said head only. Even losing, Loki found a loophole. Furious, Brock sued Loki's lips shut instead. For a time, blessed silence in Asgard. Loki's muffled screams were the only protest as thread pierced divine flesh. Thor held Mjolnir for the first time in the great hall. The hammer hummed against his palm like a living thing recognizing its master. Lightning arsed between them. He needed the iron gauntlets Grip to grip its power. He needed the belt Mejingjura to double his strength. But most of all, he needed the heart that never backed down. With Mjolnir, Thor became the guardian the realms needed. His chariot, pulled by 2 immortal goats, carried him across the sky, and wherever it went, thunder followed. Those goats held their own strange magic. Thor could slaughter them for supper, eat every scrap, and by morning, if the bones were unbroken, they'd stand alive and whole again. One night, Thor stopped at a peasant's home. He offered the goats as food for the family. The peasant's son, Thorolfi, couldn't resist. He cracked a bone for the marrow. Morning came, the goat rose, but limping. Thor's eyes darkened. The family fell to their knees trembling. One cracked bone, one broken rule, and a god's anger filled the room like smoke. But Thor's rage cooled when he saw the boy's tears. Instead of punishment, he took the Thjalfi as his servant. Sometimes the thunder god's greatest strength was knowing when to lower the hammer. Thjalfi became Thor's companion, a mortal boy running alongside a god. He was the fastest runner in any realm, and his wide eyes reminded Thor what he was fighting to protect. Now we come to the other gods who shared Thor's world, beings of power and flaw, each carrying burdens no mortal could imagine. Start with Freya, goddess of love and of war. Freya wept tears of gold when her husband vanished. She searched every realm wearing her falcon cloak, flying over mountains and seas, calling his name into empty skies. Heimdall, the watchman, stood eternal at the Bifrost's edge. He could hear grass growing. He could see 100 leagues in every direction. Sleep was a luxury he'd surrendered. Tyr, the god of justice, gave his right hand to bind the great wolf Fenrir. He placed it in the beast's jaws knowing it would be bitten off. That was what honor cost. Balder, the most beautiful god, dreamed of his own death. His mother Frigg made every substance in creation swear never to harm him. Every substance except one small plant she thought too young to ask. Mistletoe. A tiny green sprig that Frigg overlooked. In the hands of fate, the smallest things become the most dangerous. Remember that. It matters later. These were the gods of Asgard, brilliant, flawed, mortal in ways they refused to accept. They feasted as if forever existed, loved as if loss were impossible. But outside their shining walls, the frost giants nursed ancient grudges. They remembered Mir's blood. They remembered the flood. Giants have long memories and cold patience. The people who first told Thor's story lived through winters that could kill. Darkness swallowed half the year. The sea could swallow a ship without warning. They needed a god who fought back. Thor wasn't a god of philosophy or meditation. He was the sound of a storm answering a farmer's prayer. When hail destroyed the crop, when wolves took the livestock, Thor was the hope that swung back. Viking farmers wore tiny Mjolnir pendants around their necks. Not warriors, but fishermen and shepherds. Thor belonged to them. Odin was for kings. Thor was for everyone else. Thursday carries his name. Thor's Day across a dozen languages. Every week, without knowing it, the modern world still pays tribute to a red-haired god with a short-handled hammer. Picture the storyteller by the fire, 1,000 years ago, reaching this same moment in the tale. Outside, real thunder. Inside, the children lean closer. Some things never change. Back in Asgard, the giants were more than enemies. They were family. Loki was half giant. Thor's own mother, Jar, was the earth itself, ancient and giantkin. The 9 realms hung on Yggdrasil like fruit on a cosmic tree. Asgard at the crown, Hel at the roots, and everything between connected by branches no mortal could climb. Asgard's walls had been broken once before. A giant builder offered to repair them in exchange for the sun, the moon, and Freya. The gods agreed, certain he would fail. The builder's stallion Svadilfari hauled stone faster than any creature alive. Night after night, the wall grew. The gods watched in growing horror. He was going to finish on time. The gods turned to Loki. Fix this or else. The trickster vanished into the night, transformed into a beautiful mare. When Svadilfari saw her, he forgot the wall entirely and gave chase. The wall went unfinished. The builder revealed himself as a giant in disguise and flew into a rage. Thor solved this the way Thor solved most things, with Mjolnir. Months later, Loki returned to Asgard leading an 8-legged foal. He said nothing about where it came from. The gods had enough sense not to ask. Odin named the foal Sleipnir and kept it. Thor's protection extended beyond Asgard. He walked among mortals, disguised sometimes, recognized others. Farmers blessed their fields with his sign. Brides called his name for fertility. Storms announced his presence. When lightning cracked the sky over a fjord, the Vikings didn't run for cover. They thanked Thor for reminding the giants who guarded Midgard. The giants of Jotunheim tested those borders constantly. Frost giants, fire giants, mountain giants, each more dangerous than the last. Each requiring a different kind of strength. Hrungnir was the strongest giant alive. A body of stone, a head of flint, a heart shaped like a whetstone with 3 sharp corners. He challenged Thor to single combat. The duel shook the foundations of 2 realms. Hrungnir hurled a whetstone. Thor hurled Mjolnir. The weapons met in mid-air, and Mjolnir shattered the giant's skull clean through. A shard of the whetstone lodged in Thor's forehead. It stayed there, a permanent reminder that even gods pay a price for every victory. He never complained about the pain. Hrungnir's leg pinned Thor beneath its colossal weight. No god could lift it. Only Thor's own son, Magni, 3 days old, walked over and tossed the leg aside like driftwood. "You should have called me sooner, father." the infant said. Thor laughed. A laugh that rattled the heavens, his boy, already stronger than gods 10 times his age. Not every challenge required strength. Some giants fought with riddles, with illusion, with words sharp enough to cut deeper than any sword. Those were the battles Thor lost. Freya's necklace, the Bressy Singaman, caught light like captured fire. She had bargained 4 nights with 4 dwarves to earn it. Even beauty has a price in the Norse world. Fenrir, the great wolf, grew stronger with each passing season. The gods kept him chained in Asgard, but the chains kept breaking. Something about that wolf made even Odin afraid. Fenrir was Loki's child, as were the world serpent and Hel, goddess of the dead. Loki's offspring were monsters. The gods wondered when the father would follow his children's nature. The world serpent Jormungandr had been cast into the ocean by Odin, who feared the prophecy. The serpent grew until it circled all of Midgard, biting its own tail in the deep. Hel ruled the realm of those who died without glory, not in battle, but of age, sickness, or accident. Half her face was beautiful, the other half was rotting bone. 3 monstrous children, 3 prophecies of destruction. Odin had scattered them across the realms, but prophecies are patient things. They simply waited for the right time. Thor paid little mind to prophecy. That was Odin's obsession, peering into the future, trading eyes and years for fragments of knowing. Thor preferred to deal with trouble when it arrived. That was what mortals loved about him. Odin demanded sacrifice and wisdom. Freya asked for devotion. Thor asked only that you stand your ground when the storm came. The Midgard serpent haunted Thor's thoughts more than he let on. Twice they had nearly met. The prophecy connected them like 2 ends of the same rope, pulling closer each year. Asgard shone brightest from a distance. Up close, cracks ran through the golden walls. Arguments festered. Trust frayed. Loki's smile grew thinner and more dangerous. The gods held feasts to forget what they knew was coming. Mead flowed, songs echoed, and for a few bright hours, immortality felt real. Thor drank the most and laughed the loudest. Only the Norns knew the full shape of what was woven. 3 women at the roots of the world tree, their fingers never resting, their threads never tangling. Even gods submitted to their design. Thor's world was a place of fierce loyalty and sudden betrayal, where the line between god and monster blurred with every generation. Nothing was permanent, not even the sky. And somewhere in the deep ocean, circling the world in patience, the serpent waited. Its coils tightened imperceptibly with every passing age. The day was coming. But before Ragnarok, before the end of everything, Thor had adventures that would humble him, transform him, and teach even the god of thunder that strength alone cannot save a world. Thor's greatest humiliation began as a drinking contest. He and Loki traveled to Utgard, the fortress of the giant king Utgard Loki, a place where nothing was what it seemed. Thjalfi ran beside them, the mortal boy barely keeping pace. Loki's eyes darted everywhere, cataloging exits. Even the trickster felt uneasy in another trickster's domain. The hall of Utgard Loki stretched beyond sight. Giants sat at tables that could seat hundreds. The ceiling vanished into shadow. Thor felt small for the first time in his existence. Utgard Loki lounged on his throne, massive and amused. The famous Thor. You're smaller than the stories suggest. His laughter rumbled like an avalanche through the hall. Prove your worth, the giant king challenged. Each of you, show us your greatest skill. Surely the gods of Asgard can impress a humble giant's court. His eyes glittered with hidden knowledge. Loki stepped forward first. I can eat faster than anyone alive. A trencher of meat was placed before him, and a giant named Logi at the other end. They began devouring. Loki ate every scrap of meat, but Logi ate the meat, the bones, and the plate itself. Loki lost. The trickster's pride cracked like thin ice. He had never been outmatched at anything. Thjalfi volunteered next. I am the fastest runner in any realm. The giants brought forward a young giant named Hugi. 3 races. 3 chances. Thjalfi lost all 3. Now Thor's turn. Utgard Loki offered a drinking horn. Empty it in 1 draught. Most of my men manage it in 2. Even the weakest finish in 3. Thor gripped the horn and drank. He drank until his lungs burned. He drank until his vision blurred. When he finally pulled away gasping, the level in the horn had barely dropped. The giants roared with laughter. 3 attempts. 3 failures. Each time Thor drained more than any being should, yet the horn remained nearly full. Shame burned hotter than any giant's fire in his chest. Perhaps something simpler. Utgard Loki offered with mock sympathy. My cat, just lift it off the ground. Even children here manage that. A gray cat padded into the hall, unremarkable. Thor heaved. The cat arched its back. Thor strained with every fiber of divine strength. The cat stretched and stretched, but only one paw left the ground. That was all. The hall fell silent. Even the mocking giants stopped laughing. Something in Thor's effort had frightened them. One paw shouldn't have been possible at all. One more test. Thor demanded through clenched teeth, wrestling. Give me your strongest. Utgard, Loki smiled and called forward an old woman named Ellie. Thor nearly refused from the insult. They grappled. The old woman wouldn't fall. Thor pushed harder. She held firm. Then slowly, impossibly, she forced the thunder god to one knee. Thor knelt before an old woman, beaten. That night, Utgard Loki fed them well. Thor ate in bitter silence. Loki picked at his food. Even the Gialfi couldn't find his usual appetite. Defeat sat heavier than any feast. At dawn, Utgard Loki walked them to the gate. His voice dropped low, and the amusement left his face entirely. I will tell you the truth now, Thor, and you will understand why I'm afraid of you. Logi, huotate Loki, that was wildfire itself. No living thing can eat faster than flame. Your friend competed against a force of nature and nearly won. Hugi, who outraced your boy, that was thought itself. Nothing moves faster than thought. Yet Thi was close enough to see his heels. No mortal has ever done that. The drinking horn, its end was in the ocean. You were drinking the sea, Thor. When you lowered the water, the coastlines changed. You created the tides. Thor's eyes widened. Every failed contest was a miracle in disguise. He hadn't been weak. The challenges had been impossible by design, and he'd nearly beaten them all. The cat was the Midgard serpent. Jormungandr itself, disguised. When you lifted one paw, you lifted the world serpent partly out of the ocean. My court panicked, and Ellie, the old woman who brought you to your knee, she was old age itself. No one defeats old age, Thor. Not even gods. That you lasted so long against her terrifies me. Thor reached for Mjolnir if the giant had deceived him. But Utgard Loki was already gone. The fortress was gone. Only empty fields stretched where the massive walls had stood. Thor lowered his hammer. Loki let out a breath he'd been holding for days. The Jilfa simply sat down in the grass and stared at the sky. They had been utterly, magnificently fooled. The journey home was quiet. Thor learned something in Utgard that Mjolnir could never teach. Not every battle can be won by force. Some enemies don't fight, they simply change the rules. But one revelation from Utgard burned in Thor's mind: the cat was the serpent. Jormungandr had been inches from his grasp, disguised, and he hadn't known. Next time he would be ready. He sought out the giant Hymir, who lived at the edge of the world, where the sea grew dark and deep. Hymir kept a boat strong enough for the outer waters. Waters where no god willingly sailed. Take me fishing, Thor said. Hymir laughed, a sound like glaciers cracking. You, in the deep water, you'll run home crying. Thor said nothing. He simply climbed into the boat. Thor ripped the head off Hymir's largest ox for bait. The giant protested that was his best bull. Thor didn't care. He needed bait worthy of the world's greatest catch. They rowed past where Hymir usually fished, past where any giant dared fish, into waters so deep the oars couldn't find the bottom. Hymir's blue face grew pale. Thor cast the line. The hook sank through leagues of black water, trailing blood. In the deepest trench of the ocean, something ancient and enormous sensed the offering, and opened its mouth. The line went taut with a force that nearly capsized the boat. Thor braced his feet against the hull. Hymir screamed. The sea began to boil as something massive rose from below. Jormungandr broke the surface. Its head alone dwarfed their boat 100 times over. Venom sprayed from its fangs like rain. Thor stared into the serpent's eye, and the serpent stared back. Thor raised Mjolnir. Lightning gathered in the clouds above. This was it, the moment prophesied since the beginning of time. Thor's arm drew back, the hammer blazing white. Hymir panicked. He slashed the fishing line with his knife. The serpent plunged back into the deep, bellowing, the hook still in its jaw. The moment was gone. Thor hurled Mjolnir after the sinking serpent. The hammer struck the water with a crack that split the horizon. But Jormungandr was gone, back to the deepest deep, to wait. Thor turned on Hymir. The giant shrank back. One look at the thunder god's face, one glimpse of divine fury denied its target, and Hymir fell overboard rather than face what came next. Thor sat alone in the drifting boat. Mjolnir rested across his knees, still warm from the lightning. Somewhere below, the serpent nursed its wound. Their story wasn't over. He rowed back alone through waters that now seemed too quiet. The other fish had fled for leagues in every direction. Even the wind held its breath after what it had witnessed. Word spread across the realms. Thor had hooked the world serpent and nearly killed it. The frost giants whispered. The gods debated. The prophecy trembled. Was the end getting closer? Odin summoned his son. "You've disturbed the balance," the All-Father said, his one eye colder than usual. The serpent should have stayed sleeping. Thor met his gaze. "It woke when I asked it to." Father and son stared at each other across the throne room. Odin, who knew the future. Thor, who refused to fear it. Between them, the weight of everything that was coming. Meanwhile, another tale demanded telling. The morning Thor woke to find Mjolnir gone. The hammer that protected all 9 realms vanished from beside his sleeping head. Thor's roar shook the rafters of Bilskirnir. Without Mjolnir, Asgard lay open to the giants. Without Mjolnir, Thor was still immensely strong, but he was not Thor. The hammer was his soul. Loki borrowed Freya's falcon cloak and flew to Jotunheim. It didn't take long to find the thief. Thrym, king of the frost giants, sat grinning on his throne, Mjolnir buried 8 miles underground. Thrym's price was simple: Freya. Give him the goddess as his bride, and he'd return the hammer. Loki flew back with the demand. Freya's response could be heard across 3 realms. Heimdall, of all gods, suggested the solution. His voice was calm as still water. Dress Thor as the bride. Veil him. Send him in Freya's place. The hall went silent. Then Loki started laughing. This moment would have brought roars of laughter in the Viking longhouse. The storyteller pausing for effect. The bravest god in creation, forced to wear a wedding dress. The Norse didn't worship solemn gods. Their heroes belched, brawled, and dressed in women's clothing when the plan required it. Dignity mattered less than getting the job done. Giants represented the wild forces beyond human control. Winter disease, the sea's fury. Every story where Thor defeated a giant was a promise. The chaos can be beaten, you can survive the cold. The frost giants who stole and demanded ransom. They were the harsh world itself, holding warmth hostage. Mjolnir was the tool that brought it back. Every spring was Thor's victory retold. So when the Norse heard that Thor must dress as a bride to save his hammer, they laughed. And they understood. Sometimes you swallow your pride to protect the people you love. Thor stood in the bridal gown, veil covering his red beard, hands like hams clutching a bouquet. Loki, dressed as the bridesmaid, was having the best day of his immortal life. They rode to Jotunheim in Freya's chariot. Thor's hands crushed the reins. Loki reminded him to sit like a lady. Lightning flashed involuntarily whenever Thor's temper spiked, which was constantly. Thrym's hall had been decorated for the wedding. Ice sculptures, frozen flower arrangements, a giant-sized wedding cake. The frost giant king straightened his crown and smiled. His bride had arrived. At the feast, Freya ate an entire ox, 8 salmon, and 3 barrels of mead. Thrym stared. Loki quickly explained. She hasn't eaten in 8 days. So excited for the wedding. Thrym leaned in to kiss his bride and recoiled. Behind the veil, two eyes burned like furnaces. "Why are Freya's eyes so fierce?" he asked. Loki didn't miss a beat. "Eat sleepless nights of anticipation, my lord. Love makes her fierce." Thrym accepted this. Love, after all, was the one force giants understood even less than thunder. The ceremony began. Thrym called for Mjolnir to bless the bride's lap, a traditional wedding custom. The moment the hammer touched Thor's knees, everything changed. Thor ripped off the veil. His red beard blazed. His eyes burned. Mjolnir sang in his grip as lightning erupted from every surface. "You wanted a bride," he roared. "Here's your wedding gift." Thrym died first, then his sister, then every giant in the hall who didn't run fast enough. Thor in his torn wedding dress, hammer swinging, was the most terrifying thing in all 9 realms. Loki leaned against a pillar, still in his bridesmaid dress, watching the carnage with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan worked perfectly. He didn't lift a finger to help. He didn't need to. They rode home as the sun rose over Jotunheim's ruins. Thor had Mjolnir. The realms were safe again. And somewhere, a storyteller was already shaping the tale for the evening fire. Thor's adventures grew bolder with each passing age. The giant Gerd lured him to Jotunheim without Mjolnir. The only time Thor walked into enemy territory unarmed. The giantess Grid, a rare friend to Asgard, intercepted Thor on the road. She lent him her own belt of strength and an iron staff. "Gerd means to kill you," she warned. "Go armed or go dead." Gerd's daughters tried to drown Thor first. They straddled a river and raised the waters, flooding the banks. Thor grabbed a rowan branch and hauled himself to safety, then hurled a boulder upstream. Inside Gerd's hall, a chair tried to crush Thor against the ceiling. He braced Grid's staff against the rafters and pushed down. The chair's legs snapped, along with the giantess's hiding beneath it. Gerd hurled a bolt of molten iron at Thor. The thunder god caught it with Grid's iron gauntlets, glowing metal sizzling against divine flesh. He threw it back, through the giant, through the pillar, through the wall. Another giant dead. Another realm a little safer. Thor walked home under stars that seemed brighter than before, Grid's borrowed weapons warm with use. He'd return them with thanks. Each victory strengthened Thor's legend, but weakened the balance. The giants grew more desperate. Their attacks came closer together, harder, angrier. The old order was fraying at every seam. Loki's pranks grew darker. Where once he'd stolen hair, now he engineered betrayals. Where once he'd lied for fun, now his lies drew blood. The line between trickster and traitor thinned daily. Thor noticed. He said nothing. Friendship held his tongue where wisdom might have spoken. The bond between them was forged in centuries of shared adventure. Breaking it would cost something irreplaceable. Asgard's golden age was ending, though none would say it aloud. The feasts grew louder to drown the silence between them. The laughter rang a little false, the mead tasted bitter. Thor's son Modi was growing strong, red-haired like his father, fierce like his grandfather. The next generation of gods trained in shadow of a prophecy that promised them no future. Odin traveled more, seeking wisdom in every corner of every realm. He spoke to the dead. He hung from Yggdrasil again. He was building something, an arsenal of knowledge for the end. In Jotunheim, the giants sensed weakness. A new frost giant army gathered in the valleys between frozen peaks. This time they didn't plan to raid. They planned to invade. Thor heard the thunder before anyone told him. His blood sang with it, distant but unmistakable. Giant thunder, war thunder. The sound of an army marching through ice. He didn't wait for Odin's orders. He didn't call a council. Thor climbed into his chariot, goat stamping and snorting, and flew toward the storm. Alone. The frost giant vanguard met Thor at the river Iving, the boundary between realms. 100 giants, one god. Mjolnir began to glow. The river began to boil. Lightning fell like rain. Thor moved through the giant ranks like a storm through wheat. Hammer swinging, thunder cracking, each blow scattering 3 giants at once. He fought with savage joy. But there were too many. For every giant that fell, 2 more took its place. Thor's arms slowed. His breathing grew ragged. Even divine stamina has limits when facing an ocean of enemies. A frost giant blade found his shoulder. Another caught his thigh. Thor staggered. The god of thunder on one knee, bleeding into the frozen river, giants closing in from every side. Deep inside Mjolnir, something answered Thor's desperation. The runes along the hammerhead blazed brighter than they ever had. Not ice blue now, but white, white as the heart of lightning. Thor rose. Blood ran down his armor, but he rose. He lifted Mjolnir overhead and brought it down on the frozen ground with everything he had. Everything he was. The earth split open. The shockwave traveled for leagues. Giants fell like trees in a hurricane. The ice shattered. The ground itself rejected the invaders, opening crevasses that swallowed whole battalions. The surviving giants fled. They ran without looking back, leaving their dead in piles that would become new hills. The invasion was over. The border held, barely. Thor stood in the wreckage, swaying. Blood froze on his wounds. Mjolnir's white glow faded slowly back to blue, then to nothing. He planted the hammer's head in the ground and leaned on it. When the Jaffa found him, the boy thought his master was dead. Thor stood frozen, eyes closed, covered in blood both blue and red. Then one eye opened. "Tell them I won," he whispered, and he smiled. Asgard celebrated Thor's victory for 7 days. But Odin sat apart, watching from his high seat. He saw what the others refused to see. Each battle was harder now. The pattern had changed. The world serpent stirred in its sleep at the bottom of the ocean. It felt the shockwave from Thor's impossible strike. It recognized the power. And something like anticipation moved through its coils. Fenrir, bound in Asgard, pulled against his chains. The magical ribbon Gleipnir, thin as silk, strong as nothing else, stretched a fraction of a fraction. The wolf had felt the shift too. In her gray kingdom, Hel felt the dead arriving faster. Giant warriors killed by Thor's hammer, filling her halls. She smiled with both halves of her face. Business was improving. The first climax had passed. Thor had won the battle, kept the border, proven his legend. But winning battles doesn't prevent wars. And the biggest war of all was drawing breath. Peace returned to Asgard like a guest who knows it won't stay long. The gods repaired what they could, celebrated what they must, and tried not to look at the cracks. Baldur's nightmares grew worse. The most radiant god in Asgard woke screaming. Visions of his own death, night after night. His light dimmed. Even the flowers near him wilted. Frigg had extracted oaths from every substance. Fire, water, iron, stone, every disease, every poison. Nothing in creation would harm her son. She was thorough. She was a mother. She missed one thing. The gods tested Frigg's magic like a game. They threw stones at Baldur. They bounced off. They swung swords. The blades bent. Baldur stood laughing, while weapons shattered against his shining skin. Everyone laughed. Everyone except Loki. He watched from the shadows, and his mind worked like a lock. Pick on a door that should stay shut. He asked Frigg one careful question. Did everything truly swear? Loki asked, all warmth and concern. Frigg smiled. Everything except a little sprig of mistletoe west of Valhalla. It seemed too young to ask. Loki found the mistletoe. He sharpened it into a dart, a tiny, insignificant thing. Then he found Ættir, Baldur's blind brother, standing alone at the edge of the game, unable to join. You should join the fun, Loki said kindly. Here, I'll guide your hand. He placed the mistletoe dart in Ættir's fingers. He aimed the blind god's arm toward Baldur. He smiled. The dart flew. Such a small thing, barely a whisper through the air. It struck Baldur in the chest. The god of light looked down at it with confusion. Then his eyes went dark. Baldur fell. The sound his body made hitting the ground silenced every voice in Asgard. The most beautiful god, the most beloved, the most protected, dead from a twig. The light went out. Silence held Asgard for what felt like centuries. Then Frigg screamed, a sound that cracked the sky. A mother's grief so vast it bent the branches of the world tree itself. Thor's grief came as thunder, 7 days of storms that flooded valleys and split mountains. He said nothing. He wept nothing. The sky wept for him, and the earth trembled with his rage. Jrtrar stood blind and shaking, the mistletoe dart's phantom weight still in his fingers. He didn't understand. He couldn't see what he had done, only hear the silence where laughter had been. The gods searched for Loki. They found his laughter first, echoing from the walls like a curse. By the time they followed the sound, he was gone. The trickster had become something else entirely. Hermod, bravest of the gods, rode Sleipnir to Hel's kingdom to beg for Baldur's return. 9 days through darkness. 9 days through realms no living god should enter. Hel agreed, on one condition. If every living thing in creation wept for Baldur, she would release him. Every single thing. Not one eye could remain dry. The gods sent messengers everywhere. And everything wept, stones wept, trees wept, metals wept. Every creature, every surface. Every element in creation shed tears for beautiful Baldur. Every living thing wept, except one. In a dark cave, a giantess named the Koke sat dry-eyed. Let Hel keep what she has, she sneered. Baldur meant nothing to me. Baldur remained dead. The light stayed gone. And Asgard understood, finally and completely, what Loki had become. Not a trickster. Not a nuisance. An enemy of everything they loved. They burned Baldur's ship at the shore. Nanna, his wife, died of heartbreak on the pyre, climbing onto the flames to be with him. Thor consecrated the fire with Mjolnir. His hand shook. The gods hunted Loki across every realm. He ran as a salmon hiding in waterfalls. He ran as a fox, as a bird, as the wind. But you cannot hide from grief-maddened gods forever. Thor caught the salmon. His iron grip closed around Loki's tail. That's why salmon tails are thin to this day, the Norse would say. The gods squeezed, and Loki became himself again, gasping. They chained Loki in a cave beneath the earth. They killed his son Narfi, and used his entrails as bonds. A punishment so extreme it echoed the crime. Even the gods knew it was cruel. A serpent hung above Loki's face, dripping venom drop by drop. His wife Sigyn stayed with him, holding a bowl to catch the poison. When the bowl filled and she turned to empty it, Loki screamed. The Norse said earthquakes were Loki writhing in his chains. Every tremor, every shaking of the ground, that was the trickster's pain echoing up through miles of rock. Even bound, he shaped the world. With Loki bound and Baldur dead, Asgard entered its twilight. The feasts continued, but the songs grew quieter. Thor's hammer rested more than it swung. The waiting had begun. Thor visited Loki once, in the cave. He said nothing. He simply stood and looked at the face of his oldest friend, twisted in endless pain. Then he left. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Sigyn never left the cave. She held the bowl day and night, year after year, catching venom so her husband wouldn't scream. Love doesn't require approval. It only requires presence. The realms grew colder. Not enough for mortals to notice. Not yet. But the wolves chasing the sun and moon ran a little faster. The days grew a little shorter. Winter pressed a little harder. Thor felt it in his bones, the way old wounds ache before a storm. Something vast was gathering just beyond perception. The calm before the end of everything had a name, Fimbulwinter. And it was coming. Fimbulwinter arrived without announcement. 3 winters in a row, no summer between them. Snow that never melted. Cold that crept into stone and stayed. Mortals died by the thousands. Crops rotted beneath ice. Livestock froze standing. Families turned on families for scraps of food. The world forgot what warmth felt like. Thor rode through the dying world, unable to fix it. His lightning warmed nothing. His hammer could not strike winter dead. For the first time, Mjolnir was useless, and Thor knew why. Brothers killed brothers. Fathers abandoned sons. The bonds that held human society together snapped like frozen rope. Fimbulwinter didn't just freeze the world, it froze the human heart. The wolves caught the sun. Skilel's jaws closed around the golden chariot, and daylight died screaming. Across the sky, Hati swallowed the moon. Darkness absolute fell across every realm. Stars fell from the sky like burning leaves. The earth shook so violently that trees uprooted and mountains crumbled. Beneath the world, in his cave, Loki's chains finally snapped. Loki rose from his prison transformed. The venom had burned away whatever gentleness remained. His eyes held nothing familiar, only the cold purpose of a being who intends to end everything. Fenrir broke free. The magical ribbon Gleipnir that had held him for ages tore like wet paper. The wolf grew and grew until his lower jaw touched the earth and his upper jaw scraped the sky. Jormungandr released its own tail. The moment the serpent uncurled, tidal waves crashed across every coast. The sea surged inland, swallowing cities and forests in poisoned water. The serpent crawled ashore, venom spraying in great clouds that killed birds in mid-flight and blackened the sky. It came for Midgard. It came for Thor. The prophecy was keeping its promise. Naglfar, the ship of the dead, sailed from Hell's shores. Built from the fingernails of corpses, crewed by the dishonored dead, captained by Loki himself, the invasion fleet of the underworld. From the south, Surtur marched, the fire giant older than the gods, his sword brighter than the lost sun. Behind him, an army of fire giants, their footsteps igniting the ground. Heimdall raised Jallarhorn to his lips. The blast carried across every realm, through stone, through water, through the dreams of the sleeping. Every god heard it. Every god knew what it meant. Thor heard the horn in his hall. He set down his goblet carefully. He put on his iron gauntlets. He fastened the belt of strength. He lifted Mjolnir. No hurry, no hesitation, only readiness. The Einherjar poured from Valhalla. The honored dead warriors who had trained for this single day. 540 doors opened, 800 warriors through each, an army of the glorious fallen. Odin mounted Sleipnir, Gungnir in his fist. He did not rally his troops with speeches. He looked at each god once, his children, his friends, his creations, and rode to the front. Thor and Odin stood side by side for the last time. No arguments now. No disagreements about prophecy or fate. Just a father and his son, facing the same storm. The Bifrost shattered under the weight of Surtur's army. The rainbow bridge that had connected the realms for ages broke apart into scattered light, fragments falling into the void. The plain of Vigrid stretched 100 leagues in every direction. The prophesied battlefield. On one side, gods and Einherjar. On the other, giants, the dead and monsters. The space between them narrowed. Odin charged Fenrir. The All-Father on his 8-legged horse, Gungnir aimed at the wolf's heart. The wolf opened its jaws, wide enough to swallow the sky, and ran to meet him. Fenrir swallowed Odin whole. The All-Father, the king of the gods, the one who sacrificed everything for wisdom. Gone in one terrible bite. Gungnir clattered to the ground, its owner consumed. Thor saw his father die. The thunder god's scream split the battlefield in half. But he couldn't stop, couldn't mourn, because the world serpent was already coming for him. Vidar, Odin's silent son, avenged his father. He planted his boot on Fenrir's lower jaw and ripped the wolf apart with his bare hands. The prophecy had accounted for this too. Heimdall and Loki found each other across the battlefield. Two beings who had despised each other since the beginning. They fought without words. They killed each other simultaneously. Tyr and the hound Garm tore each other apart at Hell's Gate. Freya fought with a ferocity that made the giants retreat in terror. Every god spent everything they had. The battlefield was a canvas of divine destruction. Gods fell. Giants fell. The Einherjar fought and died their second and final deaths. The ground turned to mud, half blood, half melted ice. Through all of it, Thor carved his way toward the serpent. Mjolnir swung without stopping, crushing a giant with every step, lightning clearing his path. He had one enemy. Everything else was in the way. Jormungandr reared up when it sensed Thor closing in. The serpent's body had flattened mountains during its crawl to the battlefield. Its shadow alone covered leagues of scorched earth. They faced each other at last. No illusions. No fishing lines. No cats in a giant's hall. Just the thunder god and the world serpent, as prophecy had always demanded. Thor threw Mjolnir first. The hammer struck the serpent's jaw with a crack that silenced every other battle on the field. Jormungandr recoiled, then struck back with a venom blast that melted stone. The battle between them lasted longer than any song could capture. Thor struck. The serpent struck. Lightning against venom. Hammer against fang. Two forces that existed only to destroy each other. The serpent coiled around Thor. Its body tightened, crushing his armor, squeezing the air from his divine lungs. Thor wedged Mjolnir between the coils and pushed. The scales cracked. Thor broke free with a roar that reveled Jallarhorn's call. He stood bleeding, armor dented, one gauntlet torn. But Mjolnir still blazed in his grip. The serpent circled, recalculating. Around them the world was ending. Surtur's fire consumed the horizon. The oceans boiled, Yggdrasil groaned and trembled. But Thor and the serpent existed in their own private apocalypse. Venom splashed across Thor's face. It burned like liquid fire, searing his skin, blinding his left eye. He didn't stop. He swung Mjolnir through the pain, cracking another scale, then another. The serpent drove its fangs into Thor's shoulder. Venom pumped directly into divine flesh. Thor felt it spreading. Cold where everything else was fire. His arm weakened. His grip slipped. Thor tightened his grip. He would not die with Mjolnir on the ground. He would not die with the serpent still breathing. The belt of strength doubled his fading power. One more strike, just one. Thor planted his feet. He drew Mjolnir back with both hands, the poisoned arm screaming, the other burning with everything left. Lightning gathered from every storm that ever was or would be. Lunged. Thor swung. The impact was not a sound, it was a silence. A perfect, absolute silence as Mjolnir connected with the serpent's skull and ended a battle older than the world. This story survived because people refused to let it die. For centuries, the Norse passed it mouth to ear, father to child, across frozen seas and burning longhouses. When Christianity reached Scandinavia, the old gods didn't vanish. They went underground. Farmers carved Mjolnir pendants that looked like crosses. Thor hid in plain sight for centuries. Snorri Sturluson, an Icelandic scholar in the 13th century, wrote the stories down. Without his prose Edda, we might have lost Thor to the silence of unwritten history. Every culture that retold the myth changed it slightly. The Vikings who settled Iceland made the gods lonelier. Those in England made them welder. The stories evolved like living things. The storyteller by the fire shaped Thor the way a river shapes stone, slowly, surely, with each telling wearing away what wasn't essential and polishing what was. The Thor we know is 1,000 tellers' work. Back on the battlefield at the end of everything, the serpent crashed to earth. Dead, Jormungandr, the world serpent, slain by a god with poison in his blood and thunder in his heart. Thor stepped back from his kill. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. The venom worked through him like winter through wood, cracking, splitting, consuming from within. 5, 6. Thor's vision blurred. The burning sky looked almost like sunset, like the warm evenings in Bilskirnir when he'd drink mead and listen to Sif sing. 7, 8. Mjolnir slipped from his fingers and struck the ground. The sound it made was the saddest thing the dying world had ever heard. A bell tolling for its own funeral. 9. Thor fell, face first into the mud of Vigrid, the battlefield at the end of everything. The thunder god, protector of mortals, slayer of giants, wielder of lightning dead. 9 steps from the serpent. Silence settled over the battlefield. Not the silence of peace, the silence of a world with nothing left to say. Fire and ice consumed the edges. The center held only the dead and the dying. Surtur raised his flaming sword and brought it down on everything. The world tree caught fire. The 9 realms burned. Asgard, Midgard, Jotunheim, all of it returning to the void from which it came. The earth sank into the sea. Stars went out one by one like candles in a wind. For a time that had no measurement, there was nothing. Only darkness. Only the void called Ginnungagap returned. But the Norse didn't end their story in darkness. That's not who they were. People who survived those winters knew something about what comes after. Something about stubborn, unreasonable hope. The earth rose again from the sea. Green and clean, washed of all blood and ash. Waterfalls poured into valleys that had never existed. Eagles circled peaks that still steamed with newness. A new sun appeared, daughter of the old one, born before her mother was devoured. Brighter, warmer, as if she carried her mother's light plus her own. The darkness lifted like a held breath released. 2 humans survived, Lif and Lifthrasir, sheltered in the world tree's memory. They emerged into the new world blinking, holding each other, the last link to everything that came before. Gods survived too, Vidar who killed Fenrir, Modi and Magni Thor's sons, who found Mjolnir lying in the new grass. They lifted their father's hammer together. Thunder whispered from a clear blue sky. Baldur returned from hell, death releasing its grip on the god of light as the old world died and rules reset. He walked into the new sun and smiled, and the flowers that had wilted bloomed again. The new gods sat together where Asgard had stood, no golden halls, no walls to defend. Just grass and sky and the memory of what came before, and the determination to build something better. They found Odin's golden chess pieces in the grass, the game he'd been playing since the beginning, strategy pieces for a war now ended. The new gods studied them and learned what they could. The story doesn't end with Thor's death. It ends with his hammer in his son's hands. It ends with new thunder in a new sky. The Norse understood. Endings are beginnings wearing different clothes. Lif and Lifthrasir began the work of repopulating the world. 2 people against all that emptiness. They had morning dew for food and each other for courage. It was enough. The new world had no frost giants, no Fenrir, no world serpent circling the oceans. The old threats died with the old gods. Whatever challenges this world would face, they would be new ones. Modi would tell his children about Thor. He'd describe the red hair, the short-handled hammer, the laugh that shook the sky. He'd tell them about Utgard and the cat and the old woman. They'd barely believe it. Each telling would change slightly. Modi's Thor might be a little taller, a little funnier, a little sadder at the end. That's how gods stay alive. They grow with every voice that speaks them. The seasons returned to the new world, gentle at first, then deeper. Winter came, but it always ended. Spring always followed. The promise Thor fought for was being kept, and when thunder rolled across that new sky, the people of the reborn world paused. They looked up. They smiled. They remembered, even if they couldn't say exactly what. The thunder remembered for them. The Ragnarok cycle told the Norse something no other mythology dared say. Even gods die, even paradise ends. But even endings end. And after the last fire burns out, something green grows. Thor's 9 steps became legend, the distance between victory and death, measured in a dying god's heartbeats. 9 steps, not enough time for regret, just enough for one last thought. What was that last thought? The myth doesn't say. The storytellers left it open, a gift to every listener. What would you think about, with 9 steps left and the world ending around you? The Norse would have answered differently depending on who they were. A warrior might say Thor thought of battle. A mother might say he thought of his sons. A poet would say he thought of the next story. The beauty of the myth is its openness. Thor belongs to everyone who tells his story. He becomes whatever the teller needs him to be. Warrior, father, protector, fool, hero, all of these, none completely. His story speaks to anyone who has ever stood against something bigger than themselves. Anyone who fought knowing they couldn't win, but fought anyway, because someone had to. The whetstone shard stayed in Thor's forehead his entire life, the price of defeating Hrungnir. He never removed it. Every scar tells a story. Every wound carried as a story survived. Mjolnir's short handle, Loki's sabotage, became its most recognizable feature. The flaw made the weapon legendary. The imperfection made it perfect. The dwarves' mistake made it unique. Thor's marriage to the storm was as real as his marriage to Sif. He belonged to the weather, born from it, lived in it, died returning to it. Every thunderstorm is a reunion. Loki's binding and Loki's freedom. The myth says both were necessary. Without the betrayal, no Ragnarok. Without Ragnarok, no rebirth. Even the worst act served the cycle. Sigyn, holding her bowl above Loki's face for centuries. That image haunted the Norse. Loyalty to someone who has done terrible things. Love that doesn't require the beloved to deserve it. The Norse didn't simplify their gods into heroes and villains. Thor was brave but reckless. Odin was wise but cruel. Loki was funny but fatal. Humans recognize this, we are all contradictions. Thor walked out of the old stories and into the modern world without changing his stride. His hammer appears on film screens watched by millions. His name fills stadiums. His story refuses to rest. The word, Thursday, carries his name into every calendar on Earth. Berserk, the warriors who fought like Thor, became a word for uncontrolled fury. His mythology lives in the language itself. Psychologists see the Ragnarok cycle as a map of personal transformation. The old self must die completely before the new self can emerge. Thor's death isn't tragedy, it's metamorphosis. Climate scientists sometimes call ecological tipping points Ragnarok moments. The point where old systems must collapse before new ones can form. The Norse metaphor keeps finding new ground. Every generation finds something new in Thor's story. That's the mark of a myth that matters. It doesn't give answers. It gives better questions. And the questions keep fitting new centuries. Return now to that final moment on the plain of Vigrid. Thor's body lies 9 steps from the serpent. Mjolnir rests in the grass. The fires of Ragnarok burn at the horizon. The ground cools. The fires recede. Somewhere impossibly far away, water begins to stir where there was only void. The first sound in the new silence is a drop of dew forming on a blade of grass. Ash nourishes the soil. The serpent's body becomes a mountain range. Thor's blood feeds a river that will never run dry. Even in death, they give the world shape. Even in ending, they create. Modi finds the hammer at dawn. His hand closes around the short handle, and for a moment, just a moment, he feels his father's grip underneath his own. The warmth fades, the lightning stays. He lifts it. Thunder answers, softer than before, but unmistakable. The new sky accepts its new protector. The old story writes its first new chapter. Mjolnir hums with recognition. Baldur places a hand on Modi's shoulder. Your father would be proud. The returned god says. Modi nods but doesn't speak. Thor's sons inherited more than his hammer. They inherited his silences too. The new Asgard will be built without walls. The surviving gods agree. No more barriers between realms. Whatever comes next, they'll face it in the open. No more hiding behind gold. Lif and Lifthrasir's children play in meadows where the dead once walked. Their laughter reaches the new gods on the hill above. The sound is strange. It has been ages since anyone heard a child laugh in Asgard. Night falls gently on the new world. The first peaceful night since Fimbulwinter. Stars appear, but different ones. New constellations that no one has named yet. Everything waiting to be discovered. Modi stands watch that first night, Mjolnir across his knees, listening to the new silence. No serpent in the ocean. No wolf at the gate. Just wind and stars and the breathing of sleeping mortals below. Somewhere in the distance, very softly, thunder murmurs. Modi lifts his head. It sounds like his father's voice. Not words, just presence. The reassurance that some things survive even the end of the world. This is the story of Thor. The god who knew his death was written in the roots of the world and chose to live fully anyway. Not in spite of fate, in the face of it. He wrestled old age and nearly won. He drank the ocean and lowered it. He lifted the world serpent with his bare hands, not knowing what he held. His strength was never the point, his courage was. He dressed as a bride to save his hammer. He forgave a boy who broke his goat's bone. He sat with Loki in a prison cave and said nothing, because sometimes love has no words. And when the serpent came, he did not hesitate. 9 steps, that was all the prophecy allowed. But in those 9 steps, Thor proved that a life lived with courage is a life lived fully, no matter how it ends. Thunder still rolls across our sky. Every time it does, somewhere in the back of our ancient memory, we remember. A red-haired god, a short-handled hammer, and the courage to face the storm. Mjolnir was flawed. Its handle was too short because a fly stung the dwarf who pumped the bellows. One insect bite, one moment of broken rhythm, and the weapon became legend. There's something honest about a weapon with a flaw. It matches its owner. A god who was brave but not wise, powerful but not careful. Thor and Mjolnir were imperfect together. That was their perfection. The Norse world was built from a body. Ymir's skull became the sky. His blood became the sea. Creation itself was an act of violence, beauty carved from a giant's corpse. Nothing in Norse myth came free. Odin traded an eye for wisdom. Tyr gave a hand for justice. Thor gave his life for the world's survival. The Norse understood something primal. Everything worth having cost something irreplaceable. Ragnarok wasn't a punishment. It wasn't a failure. It was a season. The longest winter followed by the freshest spring. The Norse saw time as a wheel, not a line. Everything returns. The serpent biting its own tail. Jormungandr circling the world. That's the oldest symbol of eternity. The end feeding the beginning. Death nourishing life. Thor killed the circle and the circle reset. Loki is the hardest part of the myth to accept. He was loved. He was needed. He destroyed everything. The Norse didn't exile chaos. They gave it a seat at the table and watched what happened. Without Loki, there would be no Mjolnir, no Sleipnir, no golden hair for Sif. The trickster created as much as he destroyed. The Norse refused the simple story of good and evil. Thor dressed as a bride. The mightiest god in Asgard swallowed his pride, wore a veil, and did what was necessary. The Norse valued pragmatism over dignity, results over appearances. Utgard, Loki's challenges revealed a deeper truth. The world is full of invisible forces. Time, fire, thought, the ocean's weight. Thor fought them all without knowing and nearly won. We do the same. The frost giants weren't simply evil. They were chaos, cold, the wild forces beyond the firelight. Every civilization draws that line between the known and the dangerous unknown. The Norse called it Jotunheim. Thor guarded that boundary, not with philosophy or prayer, but with presence. He showed up. When the border was threatened, he was there. That's the simplest and rarest form of courage. Just showing up. Sigyn in the cave, holding a bowl above a monster's face out of love. The Norse understood that love doesn't require the beloved to be good. It only requires the lover to be faithful. Thjolfi, the mortal boy who ran alongside gods, represents every ordinary person who finds themselves in extraordinary circumstances. He couldn't lift Mjolnir. He couldn't fight giants. He was there anyway. 9 steps. The prophecy gave Thor exactly 9 steps after killing the serpent. Not 10. Not 8. 9, the most sacred number in Norse mythology. 3 times 3, completion. The Norse acceptance of fate doesn't mean surrender. Odin knew he would be swallowed. He charged Fenrir anyway. Thor knew the venom would kill him. He swung Mjolnir anyway. Knowing changed nothing. Courage changed everything. The new world born from Ragnarok has no serpent, no wolf, no frost giants. But it also has no Odin, no Thor, no Mjolnir. The price of paradise was everything that made the old world magnificent. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson. You can't keep things the way they are. The golden age will end. The winter will come. But if you face it with Thor's heart, with defiance and love and ridiculous courage, what comes after might be worth it. Thunder is just air moving fast, molecules colliding after lightning heats them. That's the science. But the feeling, that deep rumble that vibrates in your chest, that's older than science. That's memory. The next time thunder wakes you at night, listen. Really listen. 3,000 years of storytellers are in that sound, and somewhere in the echo, a red-haired god smiles. A Viking farmer buries a Mjolnir pendant beneath his doorstep. 1,000 years later, an archaeologist's brush uncovers it, still shaped like protection, still shaped like hope. Thor's hammer appears on rune stones across Scandinavia, carved into granite by people who believed the lightning god would see their mark and remember them. Some of those stones still stand. Richard Wagner heard thunder in Thor's story and built an opera around it. Tolkien read the Eddas and gave the world dwarves, elves, and a ring of power. Thor's children wear many disguises. In Iceland, some still follow the old ways. They gather at solstice, speak the old words, pour offerings to Thor, not as museum pieces, as living faith. The thunder god never fully left Scandinavia. Mjolnir pendants outsell most religious jewelry in Scandinavia today. People wear them who've never ridden Edda. They just like what the hammer represents. Protection. Stubborn refusal to quit. Scientists named an element after Thor. Thorium, heavy and powerful, discovered in Scandinavian soil. Even the periodic table carries a Norse god's fingerprint. Mythology woven into the fabric of knowledge. Every superhero who lifts an enchanted weapon, every underdog who faces impossible odds, every story where courage matters more than power. Thor is in there. He was the template, the original. Children who've never heard of Asgard still play at being thunder gods. Swinging stick, hammers, roaring at clouds, pretending they can control the storm. The instinct is older than the story. The story you've heard tonight has traveled 3,000 years to reach your pillow. Carried by voices in longhouses, scratched into manuscripts, projected onto screens, it found you, it always does. Thor's legacy isn't carved in stone or printed on a page. It lives where it has always lived, in the space between the lightning and the thunder, in the pause before the storm breaks, in the courage to wait for it. The story is told. The thunder is quiet now. Outside your window, the night holds its breath the way it always has, waiting, patient, kind. Let the old gods rest now. They've earned it. Odin in his knowing, Thor in his courage, even Loki in his long, strange sleep. The myths are safe. They don't need you awake to survive. Your breath slows. Your body sinks a little deeper. That's good. The Norse believed sleep was a small journey between worlds. Let yourself travel now. There's nothing to hold on to. If thunder comes tonight, let it be distant. Let it be the kind that rumbles at the edge of hearing. Not a warning, but a lullaby. The oldest lullaby there is. Sleep well. The thunder will keep watch.